Okay, so hi, my name is Ashley, and my project is on creating engaging lessons while still delivering all the content. So, my inquiry question that I based my project around was how do we create engaging, differentiated lessons while still teaching the content that we need to? And my hypothesis was that there's going to have to be sacrifice. Like, if we want to have super engaging lessons that are activity based and student like centered teaching where they're doing the talking and they're doing the work, there's going to have to be a balance. They're going to have some lecture. I don't think um, there's a perfect solution right now with just how our education institution is set up. So that's my hypothesis and my question. So why did I choose this topic specifically? And that had to do with my practicum. Our teacher really scared us. Like, he just made a big deal about how there's so much content and you really have to cruise through it and you have to make sacrifices and he leaned a lot on lecture because of that. But all my experience in my undergrad is about using these new techniques. We're leaving lecture in the past, make everything engaging, class discussion based, like, and so I felt like there was this like disconnect from what I learned and then what I saw in the practicum classroom. And it really made me concerned, but also really intrigued. Like, but is there a way I can do both? Was really what I walked away thinking. So that's what inspired this project. So my key findings, let me just move this. So my key findings, one was that we need to, okay, this is just always in the way. Okay. One was that we need to focus on like what our end goal is in our curriculum. Like, is it all content or are we trying to teach some skills and critical thinking skills and just in general, like uh, just like writing skills, like other things like that? Because if we're also trying to teach critical thinking and things outside of just straight content, then we do have a lot more flexibility. And lecture is not the best route to go. On top of that, there was a lot of positive things about lecture. So making sure your lectures are good and making them break them up, keep them to 15 minutes, make sure you have a clear outline. The students know exactly why you're lecturing, what they're supposed to take away from the lecture, build in times for break off discussions and activities, intertwine them, like introduce it with a video. Like, you can make your lectures really strong. And I think that was something that was a really big takeaway for me as I dove into the research. Another big thing was don't be shy in exploring other ways to deliver content. I think we get so nervous that we want to just fall back on lecture. And while lecture is a kind of a tried and true way to deliver content, it's not the only way. So I think that was something else that was a really big takeaway for me as I dove into this, that lecture really is not the only way. And there are tons of different ways. All right, so then I interviewed teachers. So this is where things got a little bit interesting. I interviewed two different teachers, and they were both very different in their beliefs about um, lecturing, I guess, specifically in delivering content, like how to get across the content while still keeping your lessons interesting. So one of my teachers kind of took the easy way out, and he was very um, kind of firm about that. He was just he was a big believer that because he had so much to get across, if he wanted his students to do well, he had to deliver the information in some way, and he relied heavily on lecture to do that. And he did have some really awesome primers, like when the students would come in, like bell ringers. And he did work hard to like, he was a really good like storyteller. Like, he's just good at the front of the class. So his lectures weren't necessarily like boring or um, like he didn't lack interest, but he relied on them heavily. And he swore by them too. He's like, there's just not a lot of ways you can branch out. Like, that was what his mentality was. And then I talked to a different teacher who was a little younger, and she was very contrast to that. She's like, the social sciences are extremely content heavy. That's what this is over here. But she was like, but despite that, she thought engagement was just more important. Like, we have to put engagement first. We have to put the students, their learning first. And she's like, there's just too many different varieties of students and their desires and their interests and their skills to only do it in one way. And so she's like, if you only lecture, you're going to miss a huge section of the class that they just don't thrive with lecturing. And I thought that was just like really interesting how she talked about you have to have a variety of lesson types to deliver your content to reach all the different students. And one way she talked about that was working with PLCs. And that I had never, I don't know why, but I never thought like, oh yeah, your PLC is this built-in team to help you with your teaching less like with your teaching skills. So She talked about PLCs and how working as a unit to make sure you're like varying how you teach is essential. And then you can work with each other to determine different assessments you want to do and tie your lessons back to those assessments. The biggest thing though she stressed was giving students choice. And she's like, not just in assessments, which is where this comes in, where we don't only have to do testing, but also just with how like the just what they're doing in the classroom at a given time. Have different like stations or have different activities that they can do. You give a brief small lecture and then you have different things that they can do to supplement the lecture and they get to pick, and bringing student choice into like every point like along the way of your teaching. And definitely she said break up, don't have all your assessments just be tests, because that you it's so easy to want to fall back onto only doing lecture when you're only doing testing. And she's like, and it's just not the best for all the students in your classroom. It just never is. So here are some tips or sources that I found to help. So this one, the first one is alternatives to lecturing. It's just a list of just different things you can do during your classroom time than lecturing. Just like a bold, just super simple list. And I loved it. It was so informative for me. This one was just about increasing engagement, and it was just tips for like it was similar to the lecturing list, but it was more nuanced. So it got more into detail on different things that you can do to increase engagement in your lesson. And that I thought found really helpful, especially with what my second teacher talked about and how she was so on about engaging your students is more important than anything else you do, and just keeping them that desire to learn alive. This last one I thought was also super interesting because it kind of took a different approach. It talked specifically about how can you improve your lecturing skills, like what can you do to make your lecture more interesting, which is something that is crucial because lecture still has a place in the classroom. It just has a smaller place than I think we realize. Okay. The last thing is my conclusions and new questions. So my hypothesis was a little on the mark, I would say. Um, I think something that I did take away was that like lectures need to be better than what we think they need to be. Like just delivering the information is a lecture, and if you do it fast, sure, but there are ways to spice it up and make it more interesting, even if you do include it. Um, but yeah, we need to tweak how we lecture if we want to include that in our teaching. And also, there's more than one way to deliver content. We don't have to rely on lecturing, and PLCs are crucial in this. But something that I took away from this, like another question that came up as I did my research, had to do with college. And it's just so hard to want to change up how students learn when I know that when they go to college, they're going to be right back in extreme lecture based teaching styles, especially for their first few years when they're in like general classes. And so, how can we prepare them for college when it's going to be completely lecture based? They're not going to have a very strong relationship with their teacher, et cetera. Like, how can we prepare them for college when we're trying to stress engagement over content, and in college they stress content over engagement? So that's like my new question, is like college specifically oriented. And then here are my sources.